Hello there. What is going on, everybody? Today I'm going to be asking the question, should Fantasy Flight Games consider using Kickstarter, specifically for a game like Star Wars Armada that maybe doesn't have quite as much buying power or selling power to the customers, and maybe a little bit of a smaller player base. So I'm going to be talking about a couple of things that have kind of led me to this question, and also want to really gather feedback from you guys on it. But before you jump in and leave a comment saying like, no, I hate Kickstarter, or yes, they absolutely should, like, I think we should talk about it a little bit first to talk about why I'm asking this question and why the change now as opposed to before. Also, do want to remind you guys there is still time left to enter the $25 Amazon gift card giveaway. You just have to be a subscriber and leave a comment on this or one of my videos. It's as simple as that. So, with that being said, I want to talk a little bit about, some of the recent decisions and some of the kind of the feel that I've managed to gather from Fantasy Flight based on talking to people at conventions, based on speeches at conventions, based on Ask Me Anythings. And a lot of this has to do with Armada centrally, but it could be applicable to other games as well. And also like the Kickstarter approach. So here's some things that we know. All right, Armada is not their #1 Star Wars game. Like X-Wing and Legion are much higher tier. I feel like Destiny's been going down. Primarily, a lot of that's due to delays and stuff. But Armada has a very loyal fan base. And it also seems that even though Armada may have fewer players, the product that they make for it instantly sells out. So it kind of has led me to think, I wonder how they view Armada, because on one hand, you could make the point, if you were arguing it to numbers, to investors or to board members or whatever, that Armada doesn't sell very much. And I talked about this a little bit in my live stream last night, but it got me thinking a little bit more, and I thought about maybe Kickstarter would be an approach to it. But, if money and selling, and numbers, hard numbers, are really the driving force, which they may become more of a driving force than they used to be with recent layoffs and, departments closing at Fantasy Flight, like Fantasy Flight Interactive. It kind of begs the question, well, what about Armada? Is Armada also going to find itself on the chopping block at some point? Or will it at least be questioned, like, is it really worth it to make another expansion? But that's not the only reason I ask this question. We've also seen concerns like this having been asked before. In the Ask Me Anything, Andrew Navarro has, had talked about, look, there's only so many ships. Basically, to summarize, he basically said that there was only so many ships they could realistically try to make for Star Wars Armada, while there are like dozens and more canon or Legends ships that exist that we could still try and get. At a certain point, I think there's like a risk factor of like, well, can we really put forth the money into making this ship, the R&D, the sculpting, the production, and all of that to make a ship that may end up just sitting on shelves and become a peg warmer. They don't want to do that. So they have to be able to justify, hey, we know we're going to sell at least this many copies in order to try to push something through to production. That's one reason why they tend to go with the most recognizable ships first. And with the Clone Wars coming out too, that's something else that becomes like more necessity than ever. Like, are they going to be able to have the staying power to, like, once the core set comes out, are they going to say, okay, well, now it's good enough, let's keep going? Or are they going to be afraid to, produce expansions for the Clone Wars core sets, or whatever they decide, whether it's multiple core sets, one core set, however they end up doing it? Are they going to do stuff beyond that first wave of Clone Wars stuff? Or is it going to be like a all right, well, imagine like if Star Wars Legion, which has just this Clone Wars core set and like first expansions out right now, like suddenly stopped. That would be kind of worrisome. So, like, how are they going to really know, how much player base is there, how much, is guaranteed sales? Part of me would initially say, well, look at when you order reprints, just how quickly they sell out. Certain ships they can't keep on the shelves, like the Architans, for example, sell out right away every time. A lot of the ships that are currently not available now, as soon as they come in, they're going to sell out instantly. This happens over and over again. I think the only ships that you tend to find are ships that were like in the core set, like Victories. You can usually find Victory Star Destroyers on the shelves because people got those in their core sets, and those are a ship that was in less demand. But What method is there to try to get a ship like the Dornian gunship, for example, that may be a little bit less recognizable, but that all your diehard fans really want and all your Armada players really want? Well, a way to do that is through Kickstarter. So here's my suggestion, and I recognize that there's pros and cons with Kickstarter, but this is me suggesting something to FFG, and I'm sure maybe they've thought about it or not, a little bit, but a lot of it's going to depend on what you guys think. So I'll probably put up some polls, whether it's on my YouTube page or on Twitter or something like that. But my thought is, if they have a hard time convincing maybe investors or the board or whoever the corporate decision makers are, like, hey, we should make the Dornian gunship, and somebody's like, well, I don't even know what that ship is. Why would we make that? Who's going to buy that? Well, Kickstarter is a way to prove that. You put it up there, say, hey, we want to make the Dornian gunship, or we want to make Wave 9, and we want Wave 9 to be these 4 ships. You know, if you back it, you know, you can, like, maybe you can back it for this ship or for that ship. It's basically a grandiose pre-order system, and it's a pretty fun way to do things. Some people are not a fan of Kickstarter, some people are. And so my question for the masses is, like, kind of how would you feel about something like that? Is that something that you would be interested in? And to summarize, for those who are not familiar, it's a way for them to put up basically a presentation. They're going to have usually video, some mock-up footage, maybe even a prototype. They'll, and a lot of board game companies, specifically CMON, does this as a glorified pre-order system in general, where they already have a copy of a game, kind of like a prototype of a game done, and they have videos and sometimes even reviews for early prototype reviews. And you can get an idea of, like, hey, this is what this ship's going to be, or this is what this game is going to be, and you get all of the information about this. And with your help, if we reach our funding goal, we'll go ahead and put this into mass production and then begin delivery. So Kickstarter does 2 different things. It allows you to pre-order what you're going to get, or whatever you want to get from it. But at the same time, it's also a way to get something funded and put into mass production such that it can then appear on store shelves. Look at, like, every Zombicide game that's ever showed up on store shelves, though that was as a result of it being funded on Kickstarter, and usually funded well over its goal. I think also, if something like this were to show up on Kickstarter, it would pull in a lot of other people who might miss, like, games like Fantasy Flight. A lot of people will buy these games and back these projects just to have the miniatures, because a lot of people really like these high-quality miniatures on their tabletop or on their mantle or on their bookshelves or whatever. So that's another big drawing factor. And so, like, a pre-order system, a lot of people pre-order products anyway, but the problem with Kickstarter is going to begin here, because while Kickstarter is a little bit different than a normal pre-order system. Like, a lot of times you have to make something already, and when it gets closer, that's when people pre-order. But for Kickstarter, you'd have to pre-order before it even went into production. So something like the Imperial Dreadnought, for example, well, you'd have to back it, you'd have to put your money down through Kickstarter, and if it funds, and if enough people do, then they collect the money, and then they go ahead and begin sending this thing off to production. So you would be pre-ordering sometimes 9 months, sometimes a year, sometimes more than a year, before you actually get your product. So a lot of people aren't willing to pre-order that much in advance, even though that's sometimes what it really takes to get, a global product created and shipped and produced and everything, and manufactured and into consumers' hands. It can take that long. It's something a lot of people don't understand, because a lot of people are used to just a regular pre-order system, and I can understand that, but at the same time, this is kind of how Kickstarter works. But the great thing about it is it's a way to get stuff that would never normally see mass production into production. It's a way to prove that, yes, there is demand for it. People want this product, and also, usually there's a pledge manager so after the funding is done, you can then go in and say, okay, now I pledged $100. Here's where I want that $100 allocated. Maybe I want 2 of these ships and 1 of these other ships, or maybe I want 3 of this ship and none of the other ship, or something like that. Or you can add more at that point, and all of this stuff. Hasbro has done something very similar with their own internal version of it called HasLab. Basically, it's crowdfunding. It doesn't have to be through Kickstarter specifically, but in just any way of, like, crowdsourcing, a dedicated pre-order system before it goes into production, something like that. So I use the term Kickstarter because I think that's the most recognizable term for a lot of crowdsourcing applications that are out there. Kickstarter is very, very well known and has a pretty good reputation. I mean, obviously, it's got good and bad things into it. But just so many ships, I think, that we would love to see that probably won't ever see the light of day if it's up to certain high-level bigwigs to say, well, I don't think that's a recognizable enough ship. So if it ever came down to them really wanting to know, what would you guys buy this? Granted, there are other approaches that could be considered, like simply putting up surveys, like, hey, would you guys buy this? But the problem with a survey is a lot of people will say, yes, I will buy it. And then when the time comes to say, no, never mind, I'm not interested. So surveys aren't that reliable. The good thing about any kind of crowdsourcing campaign, Indiegogo, HasLab, Kickstarter, you name it, is that people have to actually vote with their wallet. You have to put the money down ahead of time. And, granted, you're going to get your product. The only times usually when people don't get their product is if it's a brand new startup company you've never heard of before that doesn't have your reputation, and then they didn't know what it took to produce and manufacture something. Sometimes there are stories like that. Just about every Kickstarter I've ever backed has been fulfilled in a reasonable time frame. Some of them have taken a little bit longer. I think there was some games that took 2 years to deliver. Like Conan, I think, was one of them that took a really long time. Great game, though. I got it. And I will say this from a certain point of view. When you back something and it shows up like a year later, it's a really nice surprise because all of a sudden you've got an expansion coming that you don't have to pay for because you paid for it last year. So now you're getting, a gift in the future. It's like a gift to yourself next year. So you're giving something to your future self. So personally, I get a kick out of that. Now, there's some other drawbacks or pros or cons, depending on how you look at them, that goes along with Kickstarter, and that's the idea of stretch goals. So let's say, they were going to make a DP20 or some other, like a Wave 9. And, it was going to go on to some kind of crowdsourcing or Kickstarter. Well, a lot of times some companies do what they call stretch goals, and that's like, we need to at least have $50,000 pledged, to be able to send this in. So, globally, if at least, 1,000 people pledge $50, on average or whatever, then that means we have enough justification to go ahead and put this into production. And then anything we get beyond that, because usually when you're producing higher amounts of stuff, it becomes cheaper in volume. So the way it typically goes is if you have, if we hit $100,000, then everybody's going to get some kind of bonus. And a lot of games will do this, and some people love it, some people hate it, and that there are sometimes stretch goals that are Kickstarter exclusive. Like, oh, you can now get this other ship or this other miniature that only people can get through here. So this way, when it shows up on store shelves, all of a sudden at that point, it's no longer available. And then people are left out because they didn't know about it when it was on Kickstarter. So I would probably suggest that Fantasy Flight won't go that route. They won't put out ships that are Kickstarter exclusive. But sometimes exclusives are cool. So, like, I think the comfortable medium would be to put up some type of maybe alternate art or promos that you can get through the Kickstarter. Like, hey, you can get, a spot gloss version of this ship card as opposed to just the regular ship card that will be available at retail. If you back now, maybe you can get a poster, or some type of alternate art prints or things that are just pure fluff, or some acrylic tokens, or, some optional things that don't have any impact on gameplay, but that are just flavor that people like. Fantasy Flight is already proven to be able to do things like that with all their prize support and OP kits and all of that stuff. So the alternate art stuff, no problem there, right? But there could always be a problem with licensing, and they may not want to, they may not be allowed to go use some kind of Disney product on Kickstarter. However, the other thing that's kind of put this all to rest is that CMON, or Cool Mini or Not, or CMON, however they're pronouncing it this month, they have a Marvel game going to Kickstarter. So obviously Disney is allowing its stuff to go on Kickstarter. So I think the door is open for Fantasy Flight to be able to potentially, to work out permission with them to be able to put something like For Armada on Kickstarter, or if not Kickstarter, maybe Asmodee's own internal crowdfunding campaign. And I just think it would be a great way to be able to justify that to them that we will buy certain ships, even if they're less than popular. How many people out there want some kind of ship from Legends that, they didn't think of that or that popular? Well, that's a great way for them. All right, well, we're going to make the Bellator, and if it funds, then we'll make it. And if not, then we won't make it. And that's a way for everybody to know. I just think that that's a great way to go forward. And I'm curious what you guys think, especially with the sequel trilogy stuff eventually, growing and becoming more pronounced. I mean, we got DP20s in there. We got all kinds of ships that could eventually show up. And I think, some kind of crowdsourcing crowdsourcing is a great way to do that and to prove to them that we will buy it. But I want to hear from you guys. I want to hear what you guys think. Do you think Kickstarter or some type of other crowdsourcing effort is a good way to kind of prove that we'll buy it? Do you think it's a great way to kind of guarantee long-term continued support for games like Star Wars Armada that could potentially be in jeopardy if people think that we're not buying enough of it? I think it'd be a fun idea. I think it'd be a great idea. And I personally would gladly, put down money for a wave, even if I wasn't going to get it for a year, because at least I would know that it's still coming. But I'd love to hear from you. All right, guys, that's all I've got for you today. I want to thank you all so much for watching. I also want to thank my patrons on Patreon. You guys are amazing. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And you can click the bell for alerts if you like. There are links to all my social media and Patreon in the description below. And as always, have a great day.